Welcome to our presentation. Before we start, I just have to let you know, we will be taking some snapshots throughout this presentation on this side of the room. These photos will be gone by the end of the presentation, but if you do feel uncomfortable, this is the time to move sides. All right, let's get to who we are.
Hi everyone, my name's Jordan Templeton and I'm a solutions architect. My particular focus is in Azure and more recently into Power BI as well.
And I'm Brandon Hutchison, project manager by trade, but I also design business intelligence programs at work. Jordan and I work within Wintec in the ITS department. Wintec, for all you who do not know what or where Wintec is in Hamilton City and it's an education provider. Wintec has 20,000 domestic students split between 3 different campuses. 1,500 international students from a variety of markets, and just over 1,000 staff working between all of our departments.
Now, something that Wintec really prides itself in is being on the bleeding edge of technology, and sometimes it has made us bleed, but this particular year has been all about data for us. Not so much about bringing old reports onto new platforms, but more about rethinking how we deal with data and how we can make it more accessible to people in the business. So everything that we talk about today is going to be about that journey through data. We'll be talking about how we did it, the whole purpose of needing this BI project in the first place. And then we'll be jumping into 3 major examples of using Power BI in creative ways. We'll be looking at exploring data in Power BI, looking at different or unusual data sources, and then about how to take advantage of live data sources as well. So to set the scene, just imagine, say 10 to 15 years ago, an exec member comes down from upstairs, down to the basement where ITS is. They tap you on the shoulder and say, I need this report for my executive briefing meeting. And you go to your team and you say, fine, that should be pretty simple. There's a particular report that we need. So you go off and you look for the data sources to compile that report. And to start off, that's pretty simple. 3 data sources, not too hard to manage. But as the years increase, slowly more and more reports are asked for. Slowly the databases start to get more and more complicated. And then we get to 2016 and you have a bit of a mess like this. So this was what really prompted us this year to look into Power BI. It was how can we get all our data from this crazy spaghetti mess with all these legacy reports into a clean, consistent format, into a nice data warehouse. A format that will allow us to make this data available to our staff members. And so that's exactly what we did. We spent 3 to 6 months this year diving into all our data sources, figuring out exactly what needed to be measured and what needed to be exposed to help us in our reporting. Now, we had the data in place and that was totally fine. That was great. And now we need to decide on what the BI strategy was going to be. So a lot of us in New Zealand, a lot of our companies in New Zealand, when you look at BI, are currently in the first wave of BI, which we call technical BI. This is basically any company who's currently got SSRS reports or even Excel spreadsheets that get refreshed on a weekly basis. And these are just static reports. They're not really changing. It's quite hard to slice the data up and explore it. And it's usually built by a person in ITS or on a reporting team and then exposed to an end user. And that's it. It just stays like that. One of the goals for Wintec was about the second wave of BI, and this is self-service BI. This is where we have a business analyst go out, figure out all the things that we do as a business, and then prescribe a couple of approved reports that would be made available to end users. The difference with this second wave, though, is that the users can actually jump into the data themselves and start to explore it and answer a few of their own questions. It's not a specific prescribed report anymore. But sometimes we have a bit of scope creep and we get a bit excited. And for Wintec, we really wanted to go all the way. So we went for the third wave, which is end user BI. That means anyone has access to the data in the business. Everyone understands what the data means. And they also have the ability themselves to go out and build their own reports completely from scratch. So that's what prompted our project.
Let's jump into our first example of how we can use Power BI to explore and filter down some data sets and hopefully arrive at some answers. Data exploration, simply put, is a way for us to search and explore for the answer. In most cases, this is a complex question, which leads to more questions, but also more exploration. Just before we go into the demo, we just need to make you aware of a few things. International markets are incredibly important to Wintec. International students come from these, and they're our most profitable customer. Investing into an international market involves a significant investment of time, funds, additional staff, but most importantly, it's a significant amount of risk. Tertiary are always looking to expand their international strategy, but majority of the times what we're doing is we're playing catch up to what our competitors are doing. For this demo, we have chosen the question, which country or countries should we invest in next? This is due to the importance within our industry, but it is also relative to other industries as well. The question itself is pretty ambiguous, but still nonetheless, it will be effective to demonstrate how to reduce a complex question down to a small series of answers. Let's have a look at our strategy to do this. For this example, we'll be using what we call a filter funnel. A filter funnel is simply a way to answer the question by using a method or a series of reduction. The process involves starting with a pool of information and applying logical, simple filtration to get to a small group of potential answers. This exercise is quick and should never exceed more than an hour. This is done by, the first step in the funnel is asking the question. In this case, our question is, which country or countries should we invest in next? The second is adding in the initial data source. This is where you're going to get your answer from. In our case, it is a list of countries. And thirdly, we add in logical filters. In this case, we're going to be adding in 3. The first one is making sure we're removing the countries where we have invested in the past. We don't want to be duplicating what we're doing. The second is making sure that we can actually get the students into the country. Otherwise, there's no way we can teach them. And thirdly, making sure we are not investing into an already flooded market. Let's jump into this and open Power BI.
So just before I get into this, I just want to get a level or an idea of the skill of Power BI in the room. So would anyone say or has anyone opened Power BI before? Okay, awesome. So I guess we'll just jump into it then. Okay, great. So like Brandon mentioned earlier, everything comes back to a question. Every report that you build should be trying to answer a specific question. And the question is, which countries are we going to invest in next? For the purpose of this demo, I want to show you how in Power BI, you can take data sources from online, from your local file system, in tons of different formats, join them all together, and then produce a report from that. So in preparation for this, I jumped on Bing and I did a search for a list of countries. And I'm just going to grab that really quick. So someone's kindly uploaded a nice list of countries to their GitHub. And this is what the data looks like. We've got the country codes on the left and the list of countries on the right. And it's separated by a pipe. If I take this URL and we go back to Power BI, to add a new data source, we just click Get Data. And in this case, it's a live web data source. So if we type web, click Connect, if I enter the URL, Power BI will jump in and start running a bit of detection to try and figure the data out. As we can see, it's already discovered that there are 2 columns separated by a pipe. But I'm a little bit OCD about the data, and I like to make sure everything's named correctly. So as you can see, column 1 and 2, those aren't really the correct names. So I'm going to click Edit down here. If anyone isn't familiar with the query editor, this tool is used in Power BI to do a bit of data cleanup. So if you have any invalid columns or invalid values in your columns, this is the place to make those transformations. In this case, I'm just going to be renaming the columns. To do that, you right-click on the column header, head down to rename. This will be called country code. And the column on the right will just be country. And for completeness sake, I'm also going to rename this data set to be countries. So that's looking pretty good. If I click close and apply, that will now import that data set into Power BI. And we can see here on the right that we have that data set defined. So for the demo, we want to show a list of countries, the whole lot, and reduce it down to a really small amount. So there's a number of visualizations that will help us do that. The specific one I'm looking at for now is this table visualization. So if I drop that on the canvas, and I'll just expand it out a little. I'm going to add the country to that. And as you can see, we now have a pretty basic list of countries. I'm also going to add a total so we know how many we're actually looking at. And to do that, I'm going to be using this card visualization here. Similar process, drop it onto the canvas and add the data to it.
In our table of countries, they're alphabetically ordered, as most lists are. But for this kind of data, we're not getting the most context out of it as we can do. The table is not just a list of values, it is a list of locations, which actually holds some useful information. One of the awesome things about Power BI is the auto recognition and maps to locations. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to a map and see what happens. What you can see now is a totally different representation of the data. We're able to visualize exactly where the locations are. The third part of this funnel was adding in the filter. The goal from these filters is to reduce the noise, which actually allows us to focus on what is important and what is relevant. The first way we're going to add this filter is by removing all of our current strategies where we have invested in the past.
So this particular data source I've retrieved from our data warehouse. Before the presentation, I did a quick export, and I've just got it in a standard CSV format, and it's sitting on my local hard drive. So I'm just going to browse to that. It's a CSV, full-time students. So this screen should start to get a bit familiar. We're going to see it a few times. On the left, we have the list of countries again, and on the right, we have the totals of how many students enrolled in full-time study from those countries. The data looks pretty good. I don't need to make any changes, so I'm just going to click Load down here. And if we check on the right, we now have our two data sets listed. Now, one thing that you need to note straight away, if you're working with multiple data sets inside Power BI, is that sometimes it doesn't know how to relate them together, so you need to do a bit of manual mapping. To do that, on the left side of the screen, over here, we have this relationships button. If you click that, we get an entity view, and that shows that Power BI has actually automatically detected the relationship in this case. If we hover over it, you'll see that the country name has been related to the country name in this other data set. So in this case, we don't need to do anything. Back on the Reports tab, we can now actually use this data as a filter. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag this full-time students measure. I'm going to bring it down into this report level filters area. And if we just zoom in here, we can see that we've got a couple of different options around how we filter this data. For this particular question, we're trying to find countries that we're not really operating in yet, that we don't really have a lot of students attending from. So to exclude our busy countries, we'll be using a filter which is showing countries that have less than 30 full-time students enrolled.
So what this filter has showed us.
What's
Nope,
that?
it jumped down from 250 something to 230.
We don't have any students from Antarctica, so it's still a potential option for us to investigate. Yeah, you're right.
So what this filter has showed us is that we have actually only invested in about 10 or 15 countries. We have a lot of opportunity available. As we talked about earlier, The goal is to use logical and easy filtration to remove the surrounding noise for the question. The question asks, which countries or country should we target next? So it definitely makes sense that we remove the ones which we have already invested in the past. Let's look at the next filter. What else could we do to reduce the number using common sense or answers to questions we already know? So for us to actually bring the students into the country is usually a pretty good indicator. We're able to measure this by using public visa information. More specifically, current visa approval rates. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter our list where countries have a greater than 90% chance of actually getting into the country.
So the data we'll be using comes from Statistics New Zealand. Is anyone using any data from Stats NZ at the moment? Cool, there's a few of you. If you're not, you should definitely jump into it. There's a whole ton of publicly available information, and the data set we'll be using in this case is, like Brandon said, the student visa acceptance rates. So this one again is in a CSV format. So here's that screen again. As you can see, we've got the countries on the left. We have the number of approved and declined visas, but we also have this approval percent column, and that means how likely a student is actually to receive a visa from that country. So if we load that in, we now have our third data set listed on the right. And because we've just added a new data set, we need to make sure that Power BI knows how it's related to everything else. So a quick look back on the relationships shows us that yes, Power BI has automatically detected that relationship. So now we can build a filter using it. So like Brandon was saying, we want to only target countries where students have a chance of even getting into New Zealand, or even more specific, we want people to have a good chance of getting here. So if I take the approval percent field and I drag it down to this filter section, we want to show only countries that have a greater than 90% chance of actually having visas approved.
So again, keep an eye on the number while Jordan presses apply. What we can see is the number has reduced by more than half. Our funnel is already working. Interestingly enough, you can already see groupings of particular areas: Southeast Asia, South Africa, South America, and Central America. But at 94 countries, this is still too many to ask specific questions about. So let's be more specific and add in another filter. As we made a note of earlier, Winter gets their students through agents. Agents recruit the students, and agents do the application for the student. Just keep that in mind. So to make this easier for us, we don't want to start in an already flooded market. What we're going to do is we're going to filter our list by removing all countries where our competitors have more than 5 agents.
And this is where we got a little bit creative. So on all of our competitors' websites, the international agents are just publicly listed there with their addresses, their names, and what institute they're actually recruiting for. So what we did is we paid some interns to go onto all of our competitors' sites and basically transcribe all that information into a spreadsheet for us. And we're going to load that into this report now. Okay, so we've got the country on the right, the number of agents, and the institution. We've actually hidden the agent's name and a few other privacy-related details, but the count and the country is the most important thing. I'm just going to hit load here, and again, we should now we have our 4th data set listed. Now, what's the one thing that we should always do when adding a new data set? We need to go and check the relationships. So back to the relationships tab. And as you can see, this time, this 4th data set wasn't automatically detected. And it's not a big deal. If this does happen to you and you know which columns to connect together, all you have to do is click on the field you want from one data set and drag it onto the related field of the 2nd data set. When you let go, you'll see here that now Power BI has that relationship established. Now that we have that, we can actually use it in our filtering. Okay. So the final filter we're going to add in this case is where the total number of agents is less than 5, because we want to target new and emerging markets. We don't want markets where there are heaps of people already recruiting for our competitors. So down here we have our filter with the number of agents, and we want to show where there are less than 5.
Watch the number as Jordan presses apply. What you can see is the number has changed drastically. We are now down to a pretty reasonable number of countries to start asking specific questions about. If you look up at the map, you should be able to see a few strong groupings. South America, Europe, Southeast Asia. But what you can also see is a few stragglers, which we may have overlooked or neglected in the past. The goal of this method was not to get the exact answer, but to use a simple funneling method to remove the noise around the surrounding question and allow us a group of answers which we actually stand a chance of working through.
You'll notice that Antarctica's gone from there as well this time, so that's good.
This has now become one of the cornerstones of our implementation of self-service BI. What and how we train our staff is modeled after the successful uses of BI. It builds a foundation for acceptance. We will see resistance in using data to drive change, or change. We have now covered exploring data. We have now shown how it can be used, how simple it is, but we have also dabbled a bit into different or unusual data sources. Let's now jump to exploring our second topic.
So this was my favorite part of the BI project, trying to find interesting ways to use data that we already had in new ways. So here's a scenario that I observed at Wintec, and this probably applies to a lot of you as well. If it does apply, you can smile and I'll know. We were looking through a lot of the file shares on the network one day, and I started to see a pattern. There were a couple of file shares that had long lists of text files containing logs, just tons and tons and tons of logs. And asking people what they're for, no one can really tell you. They're just there. We create this black hole file share and we dump everything in there. And when something goes wrong, good luck to the person who has to go and find those logs. But what we realized was, actually, there is a whole ton of telemetry, a whole ton of different events and triggers and this information that could be ingested into our data warehouse for use. If we look at it from the educational perspective, for a student, what do we know about them? Well, primarily, we know how they're doing in teaching. We know if they're attending class and how their grades are doing. But there's a whole lot more that we should know about students, like how many students are driving to campus, how long do they park for, where are they printing, how often are they printing, when they come on campus after hours, which buildings are they actually accessing. All these bits of data actually help us to paint a really clear picture of how a student actually operates here on campus. Did you know that there's actually a correlation between the number of free car parks to whether or not, or to the number of students that eventually graduate? Like, that's a pretty out there kind of comparison, but it's one of the things that actually factor in, because students who can't find a car park just go home. Students don't come to class, they don't submit assignments, and then students who don't submit assignments don't pass their classes, and eventually that leads to not actually graduating. So the more data sources we can plug in, the more events we can combine together, the better the picture looks when it comes to mapping that process out for a student.
So the demo goes, there was a project previously done at Wintec. This project was all about allowing the students to access their timetable through Outlook. But more importantly, it was there to allow the students to access their timetable through multiple different devices. The expectation of this project was to give students data, i.e. their timetable. But in actual reality, they were also giving us more data than they or we realized.
So how many of us are on Office 365 at the moment? I would have, oh wow, okay. About 3/4 of us. What about Exchange on premises? That's everyone else. Okay, cool. So, like I said before, this is one of my favorite parts of the BI project, was using creative data sources. And logs was just one piece of that. But the other exciting part is there are all these infrastructure systems that we generally associate, which as a developer or as someone in data or reporting, You let the ops guys handle all those systems and they just run themselves. But what we found was actually there's a whole ton of data sitting in those infrastructure systems that we could actually make use of. So in this particular example, I'm going to answer that question that Brandon was talking about. We had the system that students were using on their mobile devices to show their calendar, and we needed to figure out how many people were even using the system. So when it comes to prototyping these types of solutions, I love to use PowerShell. What I'm going to do is actually connect to our live data source in Exchange Online. And I've just written a script to bootstrap that so you don't see the password. While that's connecting, what I'll be showing you is how to answer that question. How many people are using their devices with our systems, whether they're on campus or not? We tried a number of ways to do this, putting tracking cookies on their calendar invites, a few of the other ways. But then it occurred to us, for a student to load the calendar on their device, they had to load their Exchange account on the device. And Exchange collects a whole lot of metadata about the students, about the devices that are connected. So let's try and enumerate that. So in PowerShell, there's a command called get mobile device. It's that simple. And as we can see what it does, the get mobile device commandlet returns identification, configuration, and status information for every mobile device. So yes, there's a whole ton of infrastructure-related stuff that we don't care about, mailboxes and all that. But there's also a whole heap of stuff about the devices themselves. So let's see what that looks like. If I run that command, if I just scroll down a bit first, get mobile device. I'm just going to show the first 50 of them because we have thousands and it's going to be a long list. And just for the sake of clarity, we want to filter out all of the Exchange-specific things. So we just want to show the device type, the device operating system, and the device language. Now, as I run this is going to connect out to Exchange. It's going to enumerate all the devices that are currently connected, and then it's going to strip away all the useless stuff that we don't care about and only return all the metadata about every device currently on our network, or on Exchange. Any second. Okay, great. So as you can see here, we have this structured table sitting in PowerShell. And this is a good example of taking what is generally seen as an infrastructure system and turning it into a structured data source right here that we can actually make use of. Straight away, looking at this, you can see that we have a whole ton of iPads and iPhones. It's mostly iOS, but the versions are pretty variable. A couple of Androids and even a couple of Windows. So that's pretty interesting. And we can see that the majority of devices are actually running English as their default language. So if we're in PowerShell and we wanted to actually use this data in Power BI, all you have to do is replace this format table command with an export command. And with the last example, I showed you how easy it was to load the CSVs, so we'll just use that again. All I have to type is export CSV. Mobile devices, just give it a name. Now as I run this, it's going to do that same process again. It's going to grab all the devices, but this time it'll pipe it out to a file that we can use directly in Power BI. I'm just going to skip to what I prepared earlier, and this is the result of that query from PowerShell. So now we have this actually a fairly useful dashboard that answers the question of how many students do we have using the devices? 2,094. What's also interesting is when you factor in the time, why was it that in February we had a whole heap more devices? Well, that's because it's our peak enrollment time. And then all these other months is just natural growth. So then people can start asking questions around what can we do on those off months to start driving that engagement and getting more people to load up their devices. Now, the side effect of running this whole project was, yes, we answered this question, but this data could be used for a whole lot of other things. For example, we recently revamped our public website onto a new platform. And part of that was making sure that we could target the right devices. Well, we know what devices people are using. We know what screen sizes they have. So now we can target those specifically. We also know what operating system versions people are running. And as a service provider, we need to make sure that students are protected and safe on the network. So potentially we can send out notifications to say, either update your stuff or we're going to isolate you into a protected area of the network. And so, yeah, it just shows how the data can be taken from some infrastructure system and then presented in a useful way.
In my years working as a project manager, I have a lot that I would probably redo again, but my biggest regret is not starting to implement mechanisms that would record data earlier. Historic data is something you can't get back. It is the backbone of machine learning and predictive analytics, and there is no reason not to do it. The cost to store data these days is so incredibly low. So involve your architects, your team, and review what could be done. Build BI into every project. Let's now look at our third and final topic, responding to data in real time or immediately. One of the fascinating things about live data is that it allows you to make fast decisions with a heavy impact. We spend most of our time looking into the past to make sense, but what if we could start working in real time? As we mentioned at the start of our presentation, we'll be using the camera for one of the demos. Well, now is this time. A company's key focus should always be on their customer, and to always strive to provide the customer the best product. In our case, our customers are our students, and our product is education. So after a series of interviews with students, we started to get a common story, which most of you should be able to relate to. So start imagining this is you. It's your first day at Wintec. You're excited and nervous at the same time. After making it to your Wintec classroom, you sit down in preparation and think, what's the tutor going to be like? Are you going to know anyone else in the class? And what are they going to teach you? The rest of the class slowly arrives, and the teacher walks in. The teacher walks to the front of the room. You are sitting there in anticipation for what will happen. Then the teacher introduces himself and starts to talk. The moment he speaks, you realized what the next 12 months would be like. The teacher spoke with no enthusiasm. It was like he had recited the same lecture for the last 30 years. We jump forward 2 weeks now. You are sitting in the same class. Half the numbers are gone. And the remaining ones, they seem lifeless. The reason for this is the class was not engaged, which in education is fundamental for quality learning. In education, the delivery of content is the most important thing. It determines the success of not only our organization, but of the student. More importantly, it enables the student to learn. In all organizations, products go through a series of quality control. For this demo, we're going to explain a couple things first.
Was everyone at the keynote? If you were, did you see Nigel Parker's demo with the intelligent kiosk where it was detecting the faces with cognitive services? We're going to show you cognitive services plugged into Power BI. So within the cognitive services offerings, they have a specific section on vision. And the demo we're going to be working through today uses the Emotion API. You can see here I've got this really technical setup. I've got an iPhone attached to a selfie stick, sellotaped to this monitor. And it's taking photos every 10 to 15 seconds. And it's pushing them up to the Emotion API to figure out how this side of the room is feeling. So how does that look in terms of all the different pieces for the architecture? So first off, we've got our data source. That's a photo. If I drop that photo straight into a Power BI dashboard and you were just looking at that, as a tutor trying to look at the photo, and you may as well just look at the crowd. It's not really useful. So we need to do a bit of processing on that. So what we do is we take that photo, we push it up to an Azure function, and that function has a specific proprietary calculation that calculates the engagement of the audience. I'll show that to you soon. It does that by pushing the photo up to Azure Cognitive Services, to the Emotion API, pulls the data back, runs the calculations, and then the final step of the process is to push it into some visualization platform, in this case, Power BI. So how does that look? We've put ourselves out on the line here, so we're going to show you what the live data looks like of the engagement in this room. Quick thing to note is that the formula we're using is a high bias towards happiness. So if these guys are smiling, then we'll be doing pretty well. So this is what it looks like inside Power BI. You can see here this current engagement level on the top left. That is the last measurement that was taken, that was pushed into Power BI. On the right, it has the total number of faces that the Cognitive Services was able to see. And then down here is the amount of engagement over time. So you can see we've been pretty much ranging between 45 to a couple of peaks, 72, that's not too bad. And it's been in this range. So as someone who's presenting or as a lecturer, because a lot of the lectures are recorded, if we stack up this data against the recording, we can start to see things about how some content was a lot more interesting than others. What was it that we were doing at that particular time? How can we apply that to all the times where students were back on their phones just looking down or feeling sorry for themselves? To give you a quick look at the Azure function behind this, I'm not going to jump into the code too heavily. Here in the portal, well actually, has anyone used Azure Functions before or seen them? Okay, I'll give you a bit of background. An Azure Function basically is this code window here. You drop your code into it, and it gets run on a server somewhere on the internet. And you get given an endpoint, so this URL here. What we're essentially doing with this iPhone here, is it's uploading that photo to this URL, and then when that happens, this code gets run on the photo. And as you can see here, we just do a bit of processing on the data, a couple of averages, and then we push that piece of data up into Power BI. And that all ends up with this. So just want to run a quick experiment, and maybe you want to jump down as well. If we could get this side of the room, or actually everyone, but this side of the room is the one that's going to be counted. If you could just smile for 10 seconds, starting from now, and we should start to see the engagement level go up. Just to show that it's not fake, this is actually real. There we go. And so that kind of demonstrates how that live data could be used.
What we have seen here could assist us with tutor performance reviews, content review, but most importantly, what this is allowing us to do is make sure that we are providing our customers their best customer experience. There's many different uses for this, but a few of them could be: the tutor could be notified privately within the class. They could be alerted to smile more or to raise their tone. Or the tutor could use this as a reference for historical mapping. They could go through and see which points of their lecture or class could be changed, the way that they teach it. But what I find one of the best possible uses would be having content builders to use this data in creating the most engaging and captivating lessons. The possibilities are truly endless. For the organization, the return would be an increase in graduates, which means more postgrads, which means more sales. For us to constantly review and adapt with technology, this is what makes the difference between a good customer experience and a great customer experience. Thinking outside the box, using alternative, innovative, but sometimes unusual solutions pushes the boundaries of status quo and allows us to become the best organization that we can be. What Jordan and I would like you to take from this session is a few key points. The first, it's not hard to explore data if you understand it. You'll be surprised with the different data sources that are out there and just how easy Power BI is at answering a question.
Number two, there is a whole ton of data sitting somewhere on your network. Go and find it and pull all the data out that you can use. It's free, it's already there.
The third and final, think forward and place no limits. We're in a day and age where anything is possible, And the use of live data within our organizations needs to be tapped into. Why wait to make change when you can react to it in real time?
Like I mentioned right at the start of the presentation, Wintec's ultimate goal was to get to that third wave of BI, which was end-user BI. Now, I know that if we follow these 3 steps in each of our own businesses, that we'll be able to achieve that end-user BI, enabling anyone in the business to consume the data, to build their own reports, and to answer their own questions. So we're up to evaluation. Don't forget to evaluate our session, and the engagement should be a 5 because we saw that on the chart. And we'll be over at the happy hour by the hub, by the Xbox stand if anyone has any specific questions. Thank you.